Our next unit of study will be Post-Impressionism. This is an art era which follows the general dates of 1885 to 1905. The dates begin following the final Impressionist exhibition in 1886. Post-Impressionism became a reaction to the previous Impressionists that we studied. This would be led by Paul Cézanne, Paul Gauguin, Vincent van Gogh, and Georges Seurat. So what was their reaction? How is Post-Impressionism any different? Let's first start by looking at Impressionism again. This is a painting by Claude Monet. We see the painterly side of art coming through, the brushstrokes very visible. We see a dashing of color that is not fully mixed, that seems to be all throughout the canvas. Our eye has to visually blend these colors together. We could also look at a Renoir and see how they're depicting daily Parisian life and the happenings which seem to be instant moments. So to characterize Impressionism, sometimes we're looking at a group of artists and not just one, because Claude Monet is one style. But as a whole, we can characterize Impressionism as the use of vibrant colors, harsh, spontaneous brushstrokes, accurate depictions of light with its changing quality. And that's talking about the instant moment that Claude Monet was so interested in. The use of unusual visual angles, and the use of subjects from the modernized urban life of Paris. Now let's compare that to Post-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism is a reaction to the Impressionistic style. So what did they want different? Let's look at Paul Cézanne, who seems to be one of the main leaders in this art era. This is called the Card Players. While the subject matter has some relevance to what the Impressionists would have been interested in, daily modernized life, there's maybe a different formal quality that's quite apparent from the beginning of this. The proportions seem to be manipulated. The color palette has changed quite a bit. The angular geometry to how forms are depicted is emphasized. There's still that patchiness, the brush strokes, but it seems to be even heavier in this case. Comparing some of these paintings by Paul Cézanne, we get a grouping of characteristics. So the Post-Impressionists are going to react to the Impressionism by breaking free of some of its restrictions. If you're so focused on the instant moment of light and color, you're maybe losing out on form, shape, contour, depth. These are things that maybe can be unfolded in a deeper regard by the Post-Impressionists, especially color choice that's maybe arbitrary too. So they will continue to exaggerate, they'll continue to abstract some of the basic elements that we've seen in classical art, but what's most notable is that they are using geometry and abstracted forms rather than the abstraction of color and light. So it can be beneficial to start looking at Post-Impressionism from the three-dimensional side of art because it more clearly represents abstracted form. So let's start by talking about Auguste Rodin. Rodin was born in 1840, and he'll have a career that spans 77 years, and he'll be creating art almost up until World War I. Rodin is an artist who was largely self-trained. Throughout his early years, he made multiple attempts to get into the School of Beaux-Arts, but he was unsuccessful. So it would be a much longer pathway to becoming a full-time artist than normal. It wasn't until he was around 37 years old that he would make his major attempts. After many years of mentorship in art styles such as the 18th century French sculpting, neoclassical, and neo-baroque, he submitted an artwork called The Age of Bronze to the Paris Salon, and it was accepted. You can see here his classical approach, his understanding of anatomy, the material of bronze, and even the suggestion of contrapposto so commonly found in classical sculpture. Well, 3 years later, he would have his breakthrough commission. He designed the portal doors to the Decorative Arts Museum in Paris. These doors are now known as the Gates of Hell. See them as a counterpoint to the doorways on the left, which is the Gates of Paradise by Ghiberti. There's a classical approach here of the Renaissance that rings true. The balance, the symmetry, the depth and perspective, very consistent and organized. Looking at the Gates of Hell, you find a sense of disorder. an abstraction of form that lends to disproportionate figures. And in an almost chaotic approach, the narrative is streaming off of the edges of the panels and the doors themselves. This is an engaging way to sculpt, but it is a new way. And Rodin clearly has his own style here. As an influencer of modern sculpture, what is it that Rodin brings to the handling of the human figure? And that might be the theme that the AP test would focus on the most, is the approach to the human figure. If we look at the Gates of Hell as a sample, he has almost 180 figures that he sculpted here. The most prominent is the one in the middle. This is called the Thinker, and it's popularized because it's been made into a separate sculpture that is found in multiple areas of the world. You can see the classical core of this handling of the human figure. There's an understanding of general proportions and human anatomy, but then there are abstractions going on here. There are exaggerations of form through the hands, the feet, and even in the handling of the material. Notice how in areas you might catch evidence of the artist's pressing into the clay model that was used to create this bronze sculpture. There's a cleanliness that's lacking that might be the difference here between classical and modern. You are letting the process of making be apparent to the viewer. And that's a very new thing and something that the painters in post-impressionism will also do. Let's work through another sample of Rodin's work. At the top of the Gates of Hell is a piece called The Three Shades. The Three Shades refers to more of a Greek version of what hell is, and they are the souls that are trapped in the underworld with Hades. These figures seem to be exaggerated quite clearly in human form, as you see the necks are stretched and angled in a way that seems unnatural. There's these unnatural elements that are used because they're more expressive. They communicate differently than if you had just used the natural form of the neck and the natural angles of the neck. So by exaggeration, you create a different way to narrate a story. This is used in writing as well. The more we exaggerate, the more that we might draw someone into a story. And so while there is a moral to being truthful, there's also an aim here that tries to engage the viewer quickly and readily into the storyline before hitting them with the powerful truths that might be found in other areas of the story. Let's continue on to the AP selected work called The Burghers of Calais. This would be about 5 years after the Gates of Hell were commissioned. The Burghers of Calais is a sculpture that was created for the city of Calais and was commemorating the heroism of some individuals who were involved in the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War was a terrible conflict between England and France, and it did affect many cities, one of which was Calais. King Edward III was the King of England, and as he was overtaking some cities in France, he used his oppression in some cruel ways, one of which is he made this deal with the city of Calais. He told the citizens that he would spare their lives if they would be willing to give up the keys to the city along with 6 volunteers who would sacrifice their lives. This would be the story of the Burghers of Calais. Burghers were a rank within the city of almost similar to that of a city council. They were decision makers, and they were these men who held rank and prestige, and so by sacrificing them, you're sacrificing symbols of power. Unknown to the burghers is the fact that their lives would eventually be spared, but Rodin chose to capture the moment where each figure seems to be dealing with the idea in their mind that they would have to give up their life. So there's this cruel twist of fate that's happening in this very moment that's depicted. What would you think about if you knew that this could be your last moment? That's the torment that's going on in each of their minds, and we get to zoom in to the reactions of these 6 men. Each of them are different from each other. Some are more contemplative, some are more questioning, some are emotional and torn. What's been created is a sample of human emotion. This is Rodin's strong suit. He's a storyteller. He creates the emotion and the drama through subtle exaggeration. And we see that. The human form is at its core quite accurate, but he manipulates the expression. He stretches the human body, the size of hands, feet. They are expressive moments where they stand together as one, but are divided by the myriad emotions going on in their minds. The major theme here is sacrifice and the heroism that represents these men who were willing to give up their lives for their city. So there's something about this that is very much an honorable moment, even though it's a very painful one. The important decisions that Rodin intended for in the making of this piece is he wanted the figures to be closer to the viewer. While some of the additions today are found on high podiums, Rodin wanted them to be low and almost level with the ground. This is because he wanted a more intimate setting in which to view them, so that the viewer could have a relationship in which they see these as just like themselves. Anyone has the capacity to be heroic, to rise above their challenges. And while these figures seem to be dealing with the pain of decision and that moment of moving forward, there is a striding power to these six figures as they eventually rise to the occasion. So really, it's all about narrative, storytelling, and communicating. And Rodin had a way in which he wanted to communicate this story, to convey the emotions that he thought were significant. And that's what post-impressionism is mainly geared towards. It's about a way in which we communicate. And while we're not looking at light and color in the instant moment, we might be looking at the emotion and reactions of an instant moment. And that's where we're going to see more of the connection between the artists that we'll study. So whether it's Van Gogh or Edvard Munch or Gauguin, Klimt, Cezanne, or Matisse, they might manipulate different things, but they all have the intention to better communicate.